Hello, world. Welcome to my podcast, Chats with Baba. Baba is an international term for elder or grandfather, and I've reached that point in my life. The purpose of my podcast is to empower parents with knowledge and understanding of the natural genius that's in children, and somehow we're not allowing that to come forward. So I'm trying to inform parents about the genius that's in children and how they can best nurture it and to bring it forth. Children are born with genius. The challenge is to release it. My podcast today is going to be a little different for this reason. Last week in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the editorial page, they had an article entitled, "Let's Tackle the Literacy Crisis Together." That crisis has emerged because of the pandemic that has impacted schools. And in some cases, children have missed anywhere from 4 to 6 months of schooling. If you know anything about the school year, it's roughly 180 to 190 days. Then sometimes summer is added on. But the general school year is approximately 180 days. And anybody that's taught children knows how the school year unfolds. And it doesn't vary much from region to region. You know, children come back, teachers welcome them. They do some assessment of where children are, trying to determine if there's been a summer loss and how do they begin the instructional program for the year. Well, the pandemic has interrupted all of that. Lots of schooling went virtual. What they're finding now is that children, in some instances, didn't have access, or there were low spots in terms of having the availability of technology. All of that to say, this interruption has caused a tremendous amount of lost learning over the course of the year. And schools are trying to figure out now how to deal with it. How do we close that gap? It's an awesome task. It's an awesome task because as children grow and develop, there are a number of factors that must be taken into consideration, especially with young children. Young children by nature gravitate to each other. They touch, they do all the above. So getting back into school, the classroom has to be restructured so that they don't have the kind of social dynamics or the social interactions that normally take place. That's one piece of it. The other piece of it is to determine how much learning has been lost. And how do we close that gap? That's a daunting task. Part of what the article is saying is that we have to bring all the forces together, schools, churches, public and private organizations, and to commit all of these resources to children's success. I'm not disagreeing. My concern is, and I stay in the literature, as a professor, I stay in the literature and look at the research. Is this going to be a lost year? We don't know. We don't know the immediate impact, and we may not know for some time. The pandemic continues to disrupt. The possibility is that come fall of 2021, all schools will go back to what they were prior to the pandemic. We don't know yet. There is scientific evidence that talks about what we possibly can do. The key, however, to addressing the crisis is still education. Education is the key. And the foundation for early literacy, math, reading, is absolutely critical. And that's the lost learning that we have to pay attention to. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of the audience because it's not a quick fix. The other thing that must be taken into consideration is the emotional well-being of children. It's not just bringing them back into the school and doing business as usual. What impact has this had on their wellness, their emotional wellness? Okay. And as I said early on, children just naturally gravitate to each other. That touching, holding, caressing will not be a part of the environment as we have known it. But these are things that must be taken into consideration as we attempt to tackle the literacy crisis. So let me try to get back to what I normally talk about is the genius in our children. All parents are concerned and want their children to be literate. You know, I can remember the movie Waiting to Exhale. And this mother, once her child, I think, developed certain things, she was able to breathe again. We have to take into consideration that children are natural learners. This is the message that I've been trying to bring forth in this podcast. Children are natural learners. Each child is different from the other children. And each child develops in his or her own way. Children learn at their own rate, and they learn in many different ways. They learn by doing. They learn by playing. They learn by trying out. They learn by initiating. They learn by exploring. They learn best when an activity is what they're engaging in is relaxed and a pleasant experience for them and their parents and anyone else that's involved. It's a pleasant experience. You don't have to teach children how to play. They just do it. Let me be a little academic for a minute and read something that comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics. These are baby doctors. And I've been following this for more than a decade. And this is what they say. The cornerstone of children's development in terms of how they learn is through play. Let me say that again. The cornerstone of children's development in terms of how they learn is through play. This principle of play applies to babies and very young children as it does to those who are slightly older, the preschoolers. So from 0 to 5 is the framework that we're talking about where play is critical in terms of their development and learning. Yeah, we want them to be able to read, we want them to be able to do math and all the above, but you don't want to cram that down their throats. You know, we have to, again, understand from a natural standpoint of how children grow and develop. Now, there are numerous reports that say if they aren't literate by the 4th grade, the probability of them being successful in school decreases, that they have to be literate by then. We also know there's a wealth of information about what children need to know in order to be successful in kindergarten. Okay, there are checklists that you can look at. There are skills that you can look at, and on and on and on. But if you look at those checklists and look at the skills and look at how children naturally learn these things, then the vehicle for learning these skills and the items on the checklist is not by sitting them down and teaching them in the restrict sense of teaching, but allowing them to develop these concepts as they play. For example, it's interesting watching children just pick up items and explore what it can or cannot do. And their brain is going probably a mile a minute if we could look at it. And so they continue looking and exploring until they figure out what it is that this thing functionally is supposed to be able to do. And while they're doing that, they learn what it is, how it works, what the parts are, what it's called, and so forth and so on. So they are identifying certain terminology. Their language is expanding. Their vocabulary is expanding. Their ability to speak is expanding. All of this goes on naturally. One of the things that I appreciate in the 5 or 6 weeks that I've been doing this podcast is the feedback that I get from the audience via Facebook. They say, oh, they really appreciate the things that I explain about children, their development, and how children basically learn. Some have even said, gosh, I wish I had known this earlier. Well, there is no perfect parent. You know, all of us want to be the best that we possibly can be. And we try to do all those things to ensure that our children have a solid foundation as they are growing and developing. To what end? In one of my first newsletters, I explained what the world would be looking at in terms of what's important as this next generation goes forth. And old thinking was talking about reading, writing, and arithmetic. New thinking talks a little differently about what's expected in this new world that we're living in. And that gets into critical thinking. That gets into being resourceful. That gets into being able to make decisions. It's very different from the traditional 3 R's. Yeah, so the foundation or the essence of early literacy really comes through children playing, children exploring, children examining. And so what we have going forth is a lot of emphasis during the 0 to 5 or the pre-K years. So let me just say this relative to what is important. Most of the time, and I don't mean to be a little academic, but allow me to the permission of being academic for just a moment. The key to children's long-term success is a range of cognitive abilities, as well as non-cognitive things. They need to be able to have certain functional skills. They need to have the ability to reason, critical thinking, problem solving, persistence, the ability to get along well with others, the ability to function in a group, the ability to take turns, and so forth and so on. But all of this can be taught in the context of play. You know, we don't need to overwhelm ourselves by saying, I'm going to sit my child down and teach them the colors, numbers, letters, and shapes. The Sesame Street program over the years has demonstrated that's doable. Mr. Rogers has demonstrated that's doable. What we don't want to take away from children is what they do naturally, and that is play. And sometimes you say, well, you know, they play and they play and they play. Well, that's what they do. You know, I've spent an enormous amount of time looking at what great coaches do, male or female. When teams come back to camp, they always review and go over the basics and the fundamentals to make sure that the foundational stuff is there. And the foundational skills and the foundational behaviors become natural. You know, it's almost second nature. And we're always moving towards a level of proficiency as we go about the business of laying this particular foundation. Yeah, so again, what children do is natural. But I think the questions that generally go through the heads of parents, it says, you know, in other words, they want to make sure, what should children be learning? And what should they be doing before going to kindergarten? What early literacy instruction should they receive? And how should they receive it? And how do I get answers to these questions? Well, as a parent, you have to trust yourself, trust your judgment. I was talking to one of my students yesterday. She has a 6-year-old, and she's about to give birth in June for her second child. And she's completing a course with me. And I said to her, I want to take you out of the track of assignments. I want you to focus on your pregnancy. And I want you to to describe what it is that you're experiencing. You're now in your 3rd trimester. So she went about the business of doing a research paper on early socialization and all of that. And she submitted the paper and asked me to review it, which I did. I said, this is not what I was asking. I want you to put aside the research. And I want you to go back and look at your own childhood. And I want you to go back and look at the 6 years that you spent raising your first daughter. And I want you to look at what did you learn from your childhood that had application to your daughter. Now you're about to give birth to your second child. And I want to know what you're thinking rather than I know the literature. I want to know what's impacting on you as a mother going forward. And what are your thoughts when in the next 2 months you will have a second child? So all of what you learn in teacher education and all of what you have experienced as a parent and your own development, you pull from those 3 pieces to look at what it is that you're going to do with this forthcoming child. So that would essentially set the table for you going forward. One of the things I do know as a parent, as a grandparent, it's important to have knowledge, but you can't raise children by the book, because every child, as I said early on, is different. Every child responds differently. Every child is unique. And all of that has to be factored into the equation. The 2 critical factors is patience and time. And observing children in terms of what they do. They give you all the clues of what they are interested in. I'm sure as a parent, you've heard the expression, be careful what you wish for, be careful what you pray for. I have a grown son, and the one thing I appreciate about him at this stage of his life is the fact that he is an avid reader. Not for the sake of schooling, but he loves books. He loves reading. And if you can instill in your children to become lifelong learners, the rest takes care of itself. You know, if they have that seed in them, this desire to want to do well. One of the things as you look at young children is to look at the expressions in their face. And you see when they learn something, they light up. You see the joy as they are mastering, if you will, a particular concept or thing that they're exploring. Their face just light up. And what happens? They repeat it and they laugh again and they repeat it. So there's a certain amount of pleasure that they are deriving as they are learning. That's what you want to see. That joy is what you want to see in them. And that joy is what you want to nurture. Okay, it's a remarkable reality of what they are going through in the process of learning. We can't see it, you know, we can't always measure it, but their emotions pretty much express what they're learning and what it's doing for them. And so all of that is to say they're also building up a healthy sense of self, a healthy self-esteem, a healthy self-confidence. All of these are factors that contribute to the unfolding of the genius in your children. So for today, then, I tried to bring some thoughts about the crisis that we're facing. And you may have children who are have experienced a very disruptive school year. And the question is, what do we do about it? Well, I would say that as a parent, if you have a preschooler, I would closely monitor what's going on as they go back to school to make sure, A, that the school or the program is attending to that gap. B, I would make sure that the school or the program is attending to the well-being of the child, and to see if there's anything noticeable about what's going on. So with that, we will bring today's podcast to a close. And I do appreciate the feedback that I'm getting on the podcast through Facebook. I get comments from former students. I get comments from friends. So hopefully today is the provision of some information that will enlighten you as you continue to nurture and unfold the genius in your children. Have a good day.